Hello everybody and welcome to Finding Inner Freedom, shifting paradigms to become who you truly are. A global online event featuring over 20 speakers, healers, therapists, coaches, movement practitioners, shamans, alchemists, intuitive guides and wisdom teachers to share how we can draw on the profound wisdom that is found beyond the conditioned mind to become more free. So we can heal, be in our bodies, live from the heart, and align with our soul. For when we do this, we can create magical new ways of being and living together that help fertilize the ground for a new humanity that benefits all. Thank you for joining us. My name is Julia Koki Kyambi, and I'm your host and the creator of this event. And today I am truly honored to welcome Dr. Lotte Valentin. Welcome, Dr. Lottie.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be part of this.
So wonderful that you're here. Let me go ahead and introduce you. Dr. Lotte Valentin, the intuitive physician, is an N.M.D, author, medical intuitive, evidential medium, ancestral healer, and an international keynote speaker. She is the author of Med School After Menopause, The Journey of My Soul, an inspirational story about transformation, healing, and spirituality, which won first place in the category of spiritual leadership in August 2021 from Living Now Book Awards. This award recognizes truly world-changing books that contribute to positive global change. She is also the creator of Healing Your Ancestral Mother Wound, which she produced in collaboration with Hemi-Sync. Dr. Lottie has had 2 near-death out-of-body experiences, which resulted in her becoming clairvoyant, clairaudient, and clairsentient, and activating her life path. She was then guided to attend medical school, as well as to become an author and evidential medium. Dr. Lottie completed her medical school prerequisites and was accepted into medical school at the age of 54. Dr. Lottie is a guest teacher at Hemi-Sync, and she is also the host of her own podcast, Dr. Lottie, Science with Soul, to help people create a path to healing their own life physically, emotionally, and spiritually, and bridge the gap between science and soul. And her topic today is Live Your Life to Your Fullest Potential Through Ancestral Healing. So, Dr. Lottie, you have a very unique and interesting background. How did you end up on this unique path, working as a physician, ancestral healer, medical intuitive, and psychic medium?
Yeah, it's been quite the journey. So I was actually born and raised in the country of Sweden, which is in the northern part of Europe. And I moved to the United States when I was 21, married an American. And growing up and in Sweden back then, because I was born in the late 1950s. Mm-hmm. So now everybody knows how old I am. So back then, the state and the church had not been separated. So everybody was automatically a Lutheran. If you were born, in Sweden, you were a Lutheran. And I was confirmed when I was 14. It was just part of normal life that I grew up with. But I had no beliefs in the afterworld, angels, the spirit world. I believed that when you die, it's black and you're gone, and that's it. So, I was very structured in my approach to life. I graduated from Boston University, and then I went to work as a programmer and systems analyst for IBM. So talk about being structured in my approach. So then I had started having my kids. And after my third child, I hemorrhaged. First of all, this child was born in between a 7.4 and a 7.2 earthquake. Wow. So that was when my life flashed before my eyes, and I thought I was going to die. And many times we have these experiences, but that's not a near-death experience. A near-death experience means typically that you were either dead or very close to death, not thinking that you were going to die. So then I hemorrhaged after birth, and then I hemorrhaged again 10 days after she was born. I went to the ER. They sent me home, hemorrhaged again, went back to the ER, saw the doctor in between. And so then by the fifth, I hemorrhaged the fifth time in the ER. I had what's called a near-death experience, where I found myself leaving my body. And the interesting part was that, of course, I had no beliefs in that the spirit would somehow survive your death. And I knew I was dying at that point when I was on that table and they were trying to place an IV in my left arm, but my veins were collapsing because I was too deep into shock. The nurse on my right is coding my blood pressure and she yells out 50/15. So at this point, your blood pressure is lower than you can't support a heartbeat at that point. And it just kept plummeting. And it was at that point that all of a sudden I was just sucked out of my body. So I found myself floating outside my body. But the first thing I noticed was, how can I still be me and be outside my body? Because I had no belief in this. And then, I knew everything was peaceful and, full of love. And I didn't go anywhere in my first near-death experience. I was in the ER and I got sucked back into my body. And then I was really sick for 2 years. And I had another near-death experience, and I had something called bone marrow suppression. So I didn't have enough white blood cells, red blood cells, or platelets. So I would bruise easily. My immune system was terrible. I had a stool in the kitchen because I couldn't stand up long enough to cook for my 3 kids. So I kept, feeling like I was going to pass out. So I would actually sit at the stove and make them pancakes. And it was at this point, and I would put my knee on the floor to tie my kids' shoes. I would get a bruise that covered my entire knee. So I was in pretty bad shape. So at this point, I have another near-death experience, but this time I go to what I call the mid station. And I find myself knowing that there are levels above me and levels below me, but I hear the most beautiful music. And you can't make this music on the earth plane. So because I tried for days afterwards, we had a big synthesizer. I tried to find any sound that would sound like what I had heard. Mm-hmm. So it was this most amazing, beautiful music. But then there is this growing white light that comes from behind me. And the first thing I see is a log cabin. And I'm thinking that the music comes from the log cabin. So I open the door and look inside, but it's empty. So then without my body, it's just like I'm just like in spirit form. I turn to the left, but I'm still rotating in space. I open the other cabin door to the other log cabin, and it's empty too. I'm like, where is this music coming from? But the interesting part is that there is complete awareness, but we're outside our body. And then I turn around and I get merged in with this. It's like standing, like auto dealers have big beams of light. Or like a big beam. If you go to a concert, like a big beam of light, it's like being in that big beam of light, but it's everywhere. So it's this very, very strong, beautiful, intense white light that is more intense than any picture I've ever found on the internet. So it's hard to describe, but it's just this white light that extends into infinity. But from this light, there is pure love and light, and it's just pure unconditional love. But there is a knowing that you come from this light, you are part of this light, you carry this light within you, and you return to this light. So there is this, but in this light there is an outline of angels, and the music comes from the angels. But again, I was still struggling with my first near-death experience, which was 2 years earlier, thinking it can't have happened. I must have had some form of hallucination. Maybe something happens to the brain. And I was really struggling with putting everything in context because I didn't understand what had happened or that could even be possible. So here I am again. So I always joke, I didn't get it the first time. So the spirit world was like, let's do it again. She didn't get the message. But the music comes from the angels. So I'm seeing angels, even though I don't believe in angels. But that's my experience. And then two spirit guides come, and the spirit guide on my right communicates with the other spirit guide, and he says, "What is she doing here? She can't be here. She has to go back." And I'm like, no, wait a second. How can I still be me and be outside my body? And they said, if I told you, you wouldn't remember, but you will remember this. And then they showed me like a picture of the earth, but around the earth, it was like, I call it the fishnet because I grew up in Sweden and we would lay fishnets in the ocean. So it looks like a fishnet. So I called it the fishnet around the earth because this is 1994. So we did not have the internet yet. I didn't have access to Google anything. I went to the library to look for information, could not find anything. So this is what I see. So I call it the fishnet, a sparkling, silvery, glittery fishnet around the earth. And the spirit guide told me everything on earth is connected to each other. And everything on earth is connected up to this grid. And with that message, I got sent back to my body. So that has stayed with me now. So that was 28 years ago. My first near-death experience was 30 years ago. Second was 28 years ago. So literally for over a quarter of a century, I've been trying to put it all together. But at this point, it is those experiences that put me on my path to healing. So it is these experiences that transformed my life. And it is what I work with today in all different ways, because that connection, and then we're going to get into that because of my topic and the ancestral healing, because after 25 years of working with this, and then after these experiences, I became clairvoyant and clairaudient and clairsentient, and I started to hear and see things before they happened. I would have relatives pop in on me that had passed away, and I would know that some, family relative was going to pass away. And it was just all this, what kept happening for a period of 12 years. And after 12 years, I got the message, you have to go to medical school and become a doctor. And I said, well, I can't do that. I'm too old for that. And this also, I hope, will give a lot of inspiration for other people, because in my book, I wrote my book, Med School After Menopause, The Journey of My Soul, to help people understand that it's never too late to transform your life. And so I got the message from the spirit guides that I had to become a doctor, to give messages to people, and I was to write 2 books, 3. So this is my first book that I have written, and that message, you are to write 2 books, 3, I have gotten from 4 different mediums, 2 in Europe and 2 in the United States. And it's always the exact same message I originally received in my living room back in 2004. So that then put me on this path to go and get the prereqs for med school with no guarantee I was going to be accepted. Then I got accepted and went through medical school, graduated 2016. And as soon as I graduated, I met a woman who was a medium at a conference, and I had no idea she was a medium. And she said, I have somebody with me, and it was my mom. And she said, you have to go study mediumship at Arthur Findlay College. So 6 months later, in the spring of 2017, I found myself at Arthur Findlay College, and then the rest is history. And I went back several times and studied mediumship in England with these world-renowned teachers. So now it has become this integration, which makes perfect sense, because everybody has a life path. We all have unique life paths. Everybody's life path matters because it is what you incarnated for in this lifetime. And that life path for me is to create healing for other people. And so I understand that. So I went to medical school so I can heal people physically. Then I work with the spirit world so I can help people heal spiritually. And I work with counseling and a combination of all of this, which is ancestral healing, where I integrate my knowledge as a physician because we study counseling. And then I studied a counseling concept called ancestral healing. And then I've combined that with mediumship and my shamanic teachings and integrated it to kind of my own unique approach to create healing for other people emotionally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. So it has become a true integration just because of those near-death experiences, which put me on that path, which I really incarnated for, right? Because we all incarnated for our path. I just had to live through it.
Wow, what an incredible story. And what amazing richness you bring together with all the different fields. Wow.
Yeah, it's been quite the journey, but I love what I do, and it's a life path. So next year, who knows what's coming next, but it's just a continuation of evolving and helping other people heal.
Beautiful. So I'm really curious about the grid that you started describing and how that relates to ancestral healing.
Mm.
And maybe you could start by telling us a bit more about what is ancestral healing and how you became interested in specifically that.
Yeah, so I was working, how I became interested is a kind of a fascinating story, because I was working a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. I work as a physician through my clinic as a medical doctor, where we have to, put codes on everything and chart everything. And then I work with people spiritually through my spiritual business, where I do mediumship readings, psychic readings. I also work as a medical intuitive because I started like hearing things about patients. So I do medical intuitive on my spiritual side too. But the ancestral healing came about from, I was actually doing mediumship readings, and I had 3 or 4 readings in a row, which were almost the same. So you start thinking, oh my gosh, this sounds just like the reading I did for somebody else. Am I, you're kind of wondering, could this really be so similar to the reading I did, a few days earlier?
Mm-hmm.
And the readings were interesting because I would get, typically the grandmother. So the grandmother would come in and I would say, oh, your grandmother is showing me that she had a very hard life. She's, she's working really hard and she's kind of like being beat up. And she's telling me that your grandfather was abusive, and he would physically hurt her and hit her, but he would also sometimes hit the children. And one of those children is your mother. I see 3 children, for example. And then the client, I said, you understand this? And the client would say, yes, and that's correct. And then I would say, your mother then married your father, but your father was exactly the same as your grandfather. He was also abusive, and he would beat your mother, and he would also beat the children. And one of those children were you. And is that correct? Yes. And so you could see that ancestral pattern. It was the same. It kept repeating. Grandfather's the same as the father, which is the same as the husband. It's like each generation is pretty much repeating the same pattern. So after 3 or 4 of these readings, I said, what is it with this repetition of these patterns? What is the spirit world trying to tell me? Because when there are no coincidences, there's things happen for a reason. And it's just a matter of tuning into that and looking for the clues. Why does this happen? This has happened to me 3 times now. What's the message in this? Why am I supposed to experience this 3 times? Right. So then I looked into ancestral healing. I actually studied ancestral healing, which is a form of counseling. And then I started understanding those patterns. But that combined with that we're all connected, because not only are we, of course, connected via DNA. So whenever you have a problem, you have 50% of the DNA from your mom, 50% of the DNA from your dad. Mm-hmm. So you got that as a starting point, but then you also have your own experiences in childhood that you experienced with your family members as you grew up. And sometimes they can be traumatic experiences in childhood. But we also know, for example, with the DNA, that traumatic events are actually inherited via DNA. So if your grandfather, for example, was a survivor of World War II, or the Holocaust, which is what actually they did studies, research on Holocaust survivors. And that's how they found the gene markers. So like one gene is the FKBP5 gene, but now they've found more genes as well. And they can see that if the grandfather experienced a traumatic event, it's passed down through the generations, even to the grandchild. So we inherit trauma via DNA, but not only do we inherit via DNA, we also interconnected what I call the grid, the spiritual grid or the energetic grid, because it doesn't have to be. Sometimes the ancestral wounds come from the experiences you had and how you then formed your perception of how you fit into that family growing up. And well, when dad does this, mom does that. And if you're a woman, for example, you grew up, you married maybe the same person like your father, everything that you rejected, you invite back into your life typically. So you marry the same person, everything you didn't like about dad, and then you relive your mother's trauma. Mm-hmm. So it's just connected emotionally and spiritually, but also via the DNA. So for example, they did research via, there was a study called epigenetic inheritance of odor fear conditioning, which was published back in 2013 in Nature Science. And it was a study that was led by Brian Diaz at the Emory University School of Medicine. And they took mice, and every time they smelled cherry blossom, they would give them an electric shock. So the mice got conditioned saying, well, every time I smell that, I get an electric shock. So stay away from that smell. Then they took the sperm from that mice and they artificially inseminated the female mice. Those little mice pups, guess what? They feared the cherry blossom smell, even though they had never come in contact with the cherry blossom smell. They would be extra jumpy, nervous around the cherry blossom smell because they inherited it from their father via the sperm, even though they had never experienced it themselves. So they know that they even developed more receptors. That in the mice, it was called an M71 receptor. So these mice pups had more receptors for smelling the cherry blossom smell, so that they would be able to stay safe. So think now back of how your grandfather or grandmother survived the war and all the fear and trauma that they experienced. Well, guess what? They changed their receptors too, and then that got passed down to you. And the egg, when you look at it just, from science, the egg, when we make the eggs that we're going to make babies from, those eggs are made when you're in the womb, when you're a 20-week-old fetus. So the egg that you come from, your mom made that egg when she was a 20-week-old fetus in your grandmother's womb. So think about, well, what did grandma experience when she was pregnant with my mom? And what trauma was just even passed down via DNA, right? But then you also have all the things that you experience yourself growing up, which then forms your own, I call it the rose-colored glasses that we wear. You make those when you're a toddler. This is how I see the world. I put on my little rose-colored glasses, and the way you perceive things and the way you are going to interact and respond to things is what you learned as a very young child. But it's in ancestral healing, we talk about all the things that were unresolved. So all the actions, the actions and the reactions and the interactions of your ancestors is what gets passed down. And any of those traumatic events of actions and interactions and reactions. So if your grandfather was in war and he was reacting to, let's say, the sirens were going off, the airplanes were coming in with bombs, and he took shelter. And every time he thought, this is the day I'm going to die. Well, think of the little mice pups. So he developed all these receptors and he passed them down. And now the grandchildren are super alert for any kind of siren because they have more receptors, right? And so when you have things that are happening to people, and it could be anything, it could be, so this, for example, the granddaughter might be having panic attacks when she hears the siren, but she has never had any traumatic events herself that involved hearing sirens. She has never been in a car accident, and then, you know, people were hurt and sirens came, right? There's no trauma involving sirens in her life. Well, when you can't find the reason for your issue, it's typically ancestral. So either it was passed down via the energetic grid, your own interactions, or even just via DNA. And so an ancestral issue could be anything. It could be you're having a fear of something, you're feeling alone in the world, your relationships aren't working out, you have a disease, your OCD. It could be almost anything that it looks like it's your problem, but it's really coming from something else, because we are interconnected with everything. And, you know, of course, this is what the spirit guides told me, but the more I research it, the more I go along and live in this world, we realize, you know, how everything is interconnected. The trees have a network of communication, the mushrooms, the mycelium, everything is interconnected, and we are all interconnected to each other. We just are under this perception that we are separate from everybody else, but the truth is that we're all connected to each other. Mm-hmm. And so if you read the book, The Secret Teachings of Plants, The Intelligence of the Heart in Direct Perception of Nature by Stephen Harold Bruner, he talks about how we actually resonate and train with plants from the heart space, but we do it with all things that exist, whether it has a heart or not. And so we are interconnected to plants. And you know how people say, well, you have a green thumb and your plants are doing so well. Well, there is some truth to that, right? Because you resonate and train with everything else. And that's also how healers work, because the healer has a different composition, and it's more structured in, already has healing, a structured healing in his aura, so to speak. And so when a healer puts his hands on somebody else, he resonates and entrains with that person. Just like when you pluck a guitar string or a violin string, you got the same guitar across the room, that string will start to resonate. It will also start to vibrate, right? But we do it as people, because we are interconnected to each other. And so just by being with other people, we resonate and entrain and create healing just by being healed ourselves. And so that's what I love about ancestral healing, because for every person that I can help heal, that person then goes on and heals other people. So when people do ancestral healing, not only do they find healing for themselves, but we also send healing to our ancestors in the spirit world or here on earth, and everybody that came before us, and forward in time for everybody that may come after us. And so we change that energetic pattern that is in a disequilibrium, because we're always struggling to be in homeostasis. Our own body tries to be in homeostasis. The world tries to be in homeostasis. The universe tries to be in homeostasis. So when you have actions and reactions that are, or like wrongdoings that are swept under the carpet, they're unresolved energetic imprints. That's how I look at it. Mm-hmm. And so in order to heal that, you have to create healing, and you have to create what I call the aha moment. So it's like the light bulb goes on and you say, now I see it. Now I understand why I have this problem. I couldn't see it before. But once you see it, the problem isn't there anymore, and you can heal it. And then not only did you heal yourself, but you heal forward and backwards in time.
That is so beautiful. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and finding, like you say, such an important thing, I think, for everybody, each and every one of us, to be so aware of that when we're in very repetitive patterns that are not resolving, that the issue could really be rooted in ancestral themes.
Yeah, we get stuck in our energetic loops. Yeah. And the pattern repeats until I always talk in my book. I talk about I have a sticky note pad. It's not yellow, it's orange. But in my book, I talk about you incarnate with your sticky notes, and I'm gonna have relationship problems, and I'm gonna have these food allergy problems, and you're like covered with these sticky notes everywhere. And then as you go through life, you say, okay, I'm gonna incarnate for a relationship problem, and then you have a terrible relationship, but you end up separating, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna get what? It's not coming off.
Yeah.
The note is stuck, and because you're going into the next relationship, but it's the same person again. And it's not until you figured out what that problem is, and many times it's ancestral, you're just repeating a pattern or some sort. And once you see it, you get to take that sticky note off and you move on to your next sticky notes. But we incarnate with a whole bag of them, and it seemed so easy when we were sitting in the spirit world. 45 problems, easy. And then we get here, we're like, well, oh my gosh, what did I sign up for? So many issues. But you just have to remember that every time you resolve an issue and find the reason why you have that issue, and it doesn't matter what it is, but once you understand why it's there, it's not a problem anymore. It's gone. It doesn't matter even
demonstrating it,
right? So
I love your demonstration with the sticky note. It's so encouraging, and it makes it so clear.
Yeah.
Very helpful. Yeah. So what are some steps that people can start to take who are interested in creating healing around ancestral issues, or even finding out
Yeah.
whether you have
Yeah, a good way would be, they could always work with me, schedule a session with me on my website, which is divinespiritualessence.com or drlottie.com. The two are linked. And learn about how to resolve those issues. But I also, as you were saying in the beginning, I developed this ancestral healing, which talks about just one form of an ancestral issue. And I developed this in collaboration with Hemi-Sync, and it's called Healing Your Ancestral Mother Wound. And that is a really common issue that I see a lot. Even if people tell me, oh, I had the perfect mother. She was so nice. I have no complaints about my mom. She was wonderful. But even when people say that, there's typically a mother wound hiding underneath anyway. I would say most people have some form of a mother wound that needs to be cleared. But there are many layers to this ancestral cake, and where the problems can originate, because it can be a problem that originated with your grandmother, but you never even met your grandmother. But so it's an unresolved issue that is coming back. And I always talk about the bucket. So let's go back to the sticky notes. So your parents and grandparents, they incarnated with all of their sticky notes, right? They go through life with their little bucket, and they have a bucket that they carry with all these notes. And then you're born, and they're like, well, I didn't resolve this issue, so guess what? I'm putting it in your bucket. Here you go. And now that sticky note is in your bucket. You got it, right? And then if you don't resolve it, and you have, you pass it on to either your own children or, oh, your nephew, oh, he could take this one. Here you go. And you just keep passing these little sticky notes down for things that weren't resolved. And that's also why I think we see a lot of repetition of issues within families, right? And so you come in as a soul family and you have all these issues. And the people I work with typically is that one person that, well, nobody in my family, I hear this so often, nobody in my family is doing anything about this, or can even understand this, or understand why I would even have a session like this. And I said, yeah, because you took that sticky note. Your note says, I'm going to go in and resolve this trauma for my family. And that's why you're showing up today. So, people show up to do the work. And sometimes people doubt themselves, I think, am I doing the right thing? But just remember, anybody that's going to, listen to this talk today, you guys all showed up. You showed up for opening your minds and creating healing for yourself and your relatives and the world, because everything is linked together. And the only way that we can truly heal the world is by starting to heal ourselves.
What an important message. Yeah. So you've also got a podcast, Dr. Lottie, Science with Soul, and it ranked top ranks top 10% globally amongst 2.8 million podcasts. So
Yeah.
yeah, so what can people find there? Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I created that podcast. I started it a year and a half ago during the pandemic, and it's already climbed to the top 10% in the world. And I created the podcast to help people find healing, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, because we are truly mind, body, spirit, and it's all linked. And I always encourage people to work on all the different parts. Don't just think you can heal your cancer by being spiritual. Use all the tools. Use the tools in the physical world. Use the emotional tools, and use the spiritual tools, because you are a combination of all of it. And so if it's manifested physically, then you need to also heal using physical tools. So I created the podcast in hopes to create healing for people that listen to it. And I interview people that are physicians, bring awareness to conditions that are often missed in the mainstream Western medicine. And Western medicine is also not very good at treating chronic conditions. So a lot of those people just fall through the cracks. Western medicine is very good at heart attacks, acute conditions, car accidents, saving lives. And Western medicine is amazing, but we're not that great at treating chronic conditions. So I created that in hopes to create healing by interviewing physicians, by interviewing spiritual leaders, people that work as mediums, just like myself, medical intuitives, Akashic records, you name it. So anything that could possibly help people create a path of healing for them.
Wonderful. Yeah. Great. So we'll be putting links to all of that at the bottom of the speaker page, where all listeners can also find Dr. Lottie's free gift. Could you tell us about your free gift?
Oh, yeah. So the free gift is meditation that I call the light meditation. And it is in my book as well. And so I recorded it just to help people get started with a meditation. It's pretty short, it's like 5 minutes maybe. And it's easy, and it creates a calm and a peace inside of you. And the words that I choose for that meditation and the way it is laid out, it creates a peace and calm inside of you, but that also connects up and out with the universe itself. So you can find that. I'm sure you're going to provide the link, but if you go to drlottie.com and you look for book promo, and then you use the code book promo, you put that in, you can download the meditation for free.
Great. Yeah. We'll definitely also be putting a link. Listeners and watchers just need to just scroll down the speaker page, and you'll find the button connecting you to Dr. Lottie's website. Yeah. And yeah, so there'll also be links to your website. Are there any other ways that people can get in touch with you?
Yeah, the easiest way is probably to go to divinespiritualessence.com, which is where people can book a session with me, and they can just pick a date. It's all on the website. If there are people in Europe, I try to make the times available, because I work with people in Europe and Australia, New Zealand typically. So I try to have times that work in Europe. So I have typically a 10 a.m., which is typically 6 or 7 p.m. in Europe. And then I have 3 p.m.s for the people in Australia, because they're already the next day in the morning there. So, but if you're, for any reason, you can't find a time that works, you can always email me, and my email address is on my websites, and it's goes to my assistant. So dr.lottie.assistant@gmail.com. And then my other website is drlottie.com. And on that website, it talks about what I do when I work as a physician. So my different medical treatments and things that I'm have gotten educated in, because I'm a naturopathic medical doctor. So I work with pharmaceuticals. I also work with botanical medicine, homeopathy, and acupuncture. But I'm also trained in hormone therapy, bioidentical hormones. And I'm also a mold certified doctor for people that were exposed to mold. So all that kind of information is on Dr. Lottie, but also all the different interviews I do, I post on Dr. Lottie as well. So you can find links there, or you can just go to YouTube and put my name in there as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and your wisdom here, and your offerings are just incredible. The richness and depth and the multi-layeredness of them is really inspiring and incredible. Thank you.
Thank you for having me as a guest, and never forget that we are all connected.
Mhm.
We are all one, and it is all divine, and so are you.
Thank you.